I'll start off with a few questions to get the round robin started. And since there's so many of your wonderful faces here, I hope you join in once we begin this question asking process. So let me just kick off the event, and we will get started. So panelists, in no particular order, of course, if you could, what is your current position? In more detail, describe a typical day or work week for you within your current position to give the students a visual into that.
I'll go first. So, my current role, I'm a senior data analyst with Vanguard, and talking about a typical week, to be honest, that's great part about being an analyst is there is nothing really typical. Every day is a different day. One day we can just stay, work from home. On the other day, it's a busy day full of meetings. So realistically, the whole week, during the week, I'll be able not only go to participate in different meetings as an expert to provide the opinion, but also start on different projects. So some of the more recent ones, currently working on mapping the client behavior and client propensity to callback. So those to develop different techniques and approaches, we have to meet with our business partners. We have to manage them to make sure that everything is done appropriately. So over the course of multiple meetings and some groundwork, we get the job done.
I'll go next. So I'm Sage McLaughlin with Duke Energy. So my role is a senior products and services manager. So we have 4 products that we're actively building, and they're based off of an analytical solution of some sort. So we decided there's some sort of magic that data science can provide that we can turn into a product that produces revenue. So for the product side of things, ultimately what we do is we try to work with our data scientists to make sure that they implement the models, even if they're super lousy models, because the best model is an implemented model. So first we get their model into production, and then from there we try to give them as much heads down time to continue to retrain the model. So often coming together to identify additional data sources, additional technologies, anything that they can do in order to improve their model is what the product side is sitting on. I also run the department's incubator, and so that's where we take our data scientists and we say, if given the skills you have and the things that you have been exposed to, what could analytics do to solve Duke Energy's issues? And so if somebody recently has an interest in image analytics and another person has interest in a more predictive area, they'll come up with whatever that magic science is and say, I can provide this solution. And they basically get to, in the incubator, develop that model and prove out that analytical solution in 90 days, and then we go pitch it wherever we want. And so that's kind of where Duke Energy and the startup world start to combine. But we're a little bit unique in that we have taken data scientists out of the IT world and put them directly in the business world to connect them closer to the problems they're trying to solve. And that's empowered a lot of them to get to play in their technology space and really get to explore the way that their skill set can enhance our corporate industry. So that's me.
Awesome. So I'm Brad Llewellyn. I work for Microsoft. And probably the best way to describe my role is something we call an analytics architect. So I don't focus so much on the individual algorithms or the individual use cases, but more what technologies we can string together to make it happen. Because like Sage said, the best model is an implemented model. So my job is to make sure that customers can go from their envisioning phase to actually getting their products in production. And I help them figure out what chain of technologies they need to make that happen.
So yeah, I'm Kendra Reed. I also work at Microsoft. A little bit more kind of what he does. I work with the big data open technologies. So that includes MongoDB, SQL, Cassandra. We also have some products that we integrate with, such as Databricks. It's a startup analytics platform. And so I help customers from break-fix items that they may have had with their platforms to advisory cases where they're looking for some information on, hey, am I implementing my model correctly? How can I increase my throughput to get my data quicker, and things such as that.
Thank you, panelists. Here's another interesting question. Could you tell me what you like most and least about your work, because we're trying to present a true picture here.
Well, I like most is the ability to learn and adapt. Analytics world changes a lot. When I started hardly with some Excel skills. At this point, I'm able to code and use Python, SQL, and other code programming languages to my advantage. So having the ability to learn, it's kind of big thing that I enjoy. Also, being able to work on a project that have an impact on our company, on our clients, that's a big benefit. The things that I don't like is sometimes the job can take longer than you expect. Some weeks ended up being longer than 37 hours as they usually are. So that's kind of the part that I'm not so fond of. And of course the meetings. Everyone hates those.
We have a trend of we're just going down the line, so I'm sticking with it.
Yes.
Do you want to go?
Sure.
Go, okay. So I really like our incubator and the idea that we can be innovative and we can move really quickly. Duke is in a super interesting space, and that energy is kind of evolving right now. We're moving towards green energy, and we're talking about batteries and solar and electric vehicles. So there's a lot of really cool problems we get to solve. And that's really exciting. So in our incubator, basically putting the people with the skills right next to the problems that they can solve and saying, go nuts and let's see if we can make some money or solve some problems, is really, really fun. I think the challenge I come up against is sometimes it just takes a long time. Like, we can get a product up and we can rapid prototype and prove out a model or prove out competency and build a product in about 90 days. But sometimes getting people to pick that product up, to move it to develop or move it into more of a life cycle, to get all of that going. It's part of the corporate world is that things just sometimes move slowly. So I come from a startup background where you had to move quickly, otherwise the money ran out and end of story. The security that comes with working with a large organization sometimes means you have to be a little bit more patient. So we use that time we're attempting to be really patient, to find additional data sources, to find out what new technologies out there, to see what either competitors or smaller analytical startups are doing, and just get a lot more knowledgeable in the space. But I think in general, I like the fast moving, and I'm impatient when it comes to the slow moving stuff.
I basically echo everything she said. So as far as what I really like about my job, the fact that I get to touch the entire data space effectively, honestly, the entire tech space as far as Microsoft's concerned, it means that every problem I get to solve is a brand new problem. I could talk to a retailer in the morning who's trying to build smart grocery shelves that don't even have tags. They just have LED displays on them. And then in the afternoon, I could be talking to nurses who are trying to figure out how to save lives more effectively. So there's definitely a great variety of work out there in analytics. To echo her point, now that I've moved from my older jobs of smaller organizations to a much larger organization like Microsoft, things do move slowly. So patience is definitely something that we all have to learn at some point. You might have a great idea and you might want to change something, but it just might not happen in exactly the pace you might want it to.
For me, just as we mentioned before, I work with international customers, so it could be anyone in the world that you're working with. And 9 times out of 10, if you're seeing their commercial on TV, I probably work with them. So you get to see a lot of different companies and how they're using their data, how they're analyzing their data, and what steps they're taking to get the analysis that they're wanting. On the downside of that, because you're working with so many different companies, and since I'm in the open space, the open source space, you see a lot of different technologies than just a subset of technologies. So there's a lot of open source technologies that are out there that do a lot of the same things, but you see where some companies are using this sort of open source and another one's using a different one. But you see where the first company, because they're using open source, it's not fully vetted and they may be running into issues, as in that second company. It's more common, it's more vetted process for developing that open source, so that one is able to run much more better than the first one. So it's having to have those conversations with customers sometime on understanding why they choose this versus something else to help drive their business.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to piggyback on that one a little bit, because we might have totally brought down the spirit of the place, saying everything moves really slow. And I don't want to depress you all, being like, I don't want to do that. I will say one of the things that I think is a challenge in the analytics space, and probably something you bump up against, is you know a technology, you know the skills, you know what value it can add, and yet your end user, whoever that might be, doesn't fully grasp it. Analytics is hard. Like, if you guys have ever tried to explain your major to somebody, like, you see the disconnect between what is data science or what is machine learning. When we talk about deep learning, how is that different? And so I think oftentimes a big challenge or a big frustration point for a lot of people in this area is explaining what you can do, where you're at today, but also where you could take them. And they only want to go one step with you, and you want them to go the whole 9 yards. And so helping them along that way, I think, can be a very frustrating process. But I think that's why like having the really good communication skills, knowing your technology really well, puts you in an advantage, because then they trust you. You took them a foot, and that's as far as they wanted to go, and you already have a roadmap for them of where they're going next. And so I think that's the frustrating part, is sometimes being smarter than your end user and not just blatantly saying it, but helping them get there and helping them understand what you can do.
To kind of read into that, the moral of that story is learn to communicate effectively. It's gonna matter far more than what you know. Your tech skills are largely going to play second to your communication skills and your interpersonal skills. So that's the most important things you could ever work on.
That's indeed a very big part. Even working mostly with internal clients, where you would expect everyone should be either on the same level or have a better understanding of the environment, you would still need to be really good in presenting the information and being able to say it in common words.
Thank you. That ties beautifully into my next question. What do you feel when you look at your peers, yourselves, or if you've ever been in a position to hire, what makes a very successful data analytics professional?
I can start this one because we've been hiring a bunch. So for us, with that incubator side of it, we're looking for driven. So if you know the technologies, if you have the interest, you have your beautiful degree, you have your coding languages, you have all that, that's great, but we're looking for that above and beyond. What are your pet projects? Talk about hackathons that you've done, anything that says, I'm not just interested in this because it's going to get my paycheck. I'm interested in it because it's fascinating, because the work I do is cool. So we always look for what is that above and beyond in driven. And that doesn't always have to be technology based. It doesn't always have to be specific to your skill based. It's that idea of like, I do something besides what somebody has asked me to do. I go above and beyond. So I run a marathon on the weekend, or like I said, the hackathons are like key ones that I always identify. That's big, because I think when it comes to the skill-based things, there's a lot that you can teach people, and there's a lot that they can learn, and you want them to kind of do it your industry's way or your company's way, but it's that attitude that you're looking for, in that if I'm working on a cool project, or if I'm trying to solve a fascinating problem, I'm going to go above and beyond because I actually care about it, not because you're paying me. And so we look for that driven edge, but then obviously the knowing Python, magic and creation behind it goes into it as well.
Yep. To add to the point that every company have their own set of tools developed. Like, I bet you've seen a lot of different companies use different open source programming languages. We use the tools that Bank of America, Wells Fargo may not use, and there is no perfect candidate that knows everything that your company uses, because even some companies have their own specifically developed tools. So realistically, you can be technically inclined and having the technical skills, like being able to go code, have a logical thinking and logical approach to solving the problem, is going to be your key kind of helpful things to have. But this being driven, being able to learn, being able to adopt is going to be your number one kind of skill we're looking for.
Those are absolutely amazing points. The one thing I always think about is well over 90% of the people you're ever going to work with are only going to work 40 hours a week. They're going to clock in at 9, they're going to leave at 5 and never think about it again. So if you do that same thing, you are by very definition going to be in the middle of the pack. I hear all the time people talking about they've been downsized and reorganization, they lost their job or got transferred, and my question to them is always, so what were you doing yesterday? to prevent this? And most of them don't have an answer. They say nothing. I was showing up at work like everybody else was. So kind of what they were saying is, put in a couple extra hours. Get on GitHub or Stack Overflow or hackathons, or put forth a little bit of extra effort, and you're already 90% of the way there. The one other thing I do like to talk about is to be passionate enough to talk to other people about it, and not just at them, but listen. So one of the things I always love to do when I'm interviewing other people or interviewing myself is to ask questions. Just constantly ask them what they think. How would they solve it? What are their opinions? Be conversational, and the rest just flows.
Yeah, I think pretty much to sum it all, I think you just have to be inquisitive about what you're doing. I mean, you're going to always hit these roadblocks as you're building out these data pipelines and things like that. But you just need to continue to be inquisitive about how can I improve myself, to be a better data analyst altogether. That's one of the things. And how do you collaborate with others, right? So you're trying to build this pipeline, you run into this issue, but do you keep it to yourself, or do you work with your teammates to understand what may be the best approach? The guy next to you may have a better approach than you do, and with you two guys working together, you may end up with an even better solution. So.
Question for you guys: are you guys all agile?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that I don't think is addressed a lot. Like, have you guys heard of agility? Okay, good. Then it's addressed. That's one issue that I think people overlook is the big industries, the banks, the big industries are moving from waterfall to agile. And if we have to teach somebody who's great at the skill, the process to get the skill applied, that's sometimes a hurdle to come over. And I think specifically with model creation and data science, agility's hard because you can't necessarily crank out a model in a 2-week sprint and call it good. And so figuring out a really complementary way to be agile, to know agile, but then also know how you work in it and how you work your space in it. I think that's often overlooked, where we assume people walk in the door with that agile competency. And then if that's an issue, that's one we try to address very quickly in that, they probably can do it, but let's go put them in a different department until they get good and then pull them back. So I think agile is very easy and very fast to learn, but it's worth taking the time to put that on your resume, make sure you understand it, make sure if somebody asks how does data science play in it, how does analytics play in it, you have a general understanding of how that works, because those two things are not necessarily cohesive all the time.
Those 2 weeks come quick. 2 weeks come quick.
I would like to open it up to the students so that you can ask your detailed questions. So please, dive in.
Opinion, what's the big difference between a data scientist and a data analyst?
Aren't you a data analyst? You have a data analyst background,
Yeah,
right?
that
You
would
answer
be
this one.
I'll probably go for probably the skill. I would assume that with the data analyst, you'll have to be closer to the business to be able to be the conduit between the data scientist and the actual business. Because whatever business request, keep in mind we have a lot of managers, team leaders who never heard of Excel. I mean, maybe that's our exaggeration, but never heard of SQL. So trying to explain that what needs to be done and how they need to get that done might be somewhat difficult. So you being a data analyst, you have to scope out the requirements you have to understand. And if there's anything, let's say I'm missing, if I have to create a flexible data model that will be able to support them, that's where I might need the assistance of the data science to help me source out some of the other sources of data that I don't have direct access to. So I'll probably say the capability and the skills.
I might break with the group here, but I don't think there's the slightest bit of difference, honestly. And not because there's anything wrong with either of those titles, but it's because a lot of people use data scientist. Virtually everything you can imagine that has anything to do with data, somebody's pitched it as a data science role. So the one thing I would say to maybe get deeper into your point is ask deeper questions, read job descriptions. If you're working with recruiters, ask them a bit more about it, because data scientist can mean anything from somebody who's munging data in Excel all day, to somebody who's writing Python scripts, to somebody who's building Hadoop clusters. All of those are data scientists to somebody. So.
I can speak to how it is at Duke. I can't speak to how it is in the rest of the world at all. I think of it as three very complementary roles. So you have your data analyst who is smart about the data, whatever the data source is. So if that's customer billing data or if that's usage data, this is your person who knows the ins and out. They're kind of your data analyst. You have your data engineer who's moving data from point A to point B and architecting it and using the Hadoops and the open source platforms, all those kind of areas for you. Then you have your data scientist, who they want all of the data, they want it moved in all of the right place, but ultimately they want to play with the data. So they want to see the different ways that they can put it together, the different insights they can pull from it. They're really more concerned with the problem than the solution. So they fall in love with the problem, and any solution could be the right solution. They don't really care. They just want to keep playing with it. So we play in the data science space. And like I said, we move data science out of IT and into the business to put them closer to the problem. But data engineers and data analysts are still in IT at Duke, or at least in our area of Duke. And that did two things for data science. One, again, closer to the problem, so that's great. But two, it also built a career path for management. So the idea that they have a very clean ladder to go either technical or that more managerial route opened it up for them. But again, Duke is one place of many, and everybody treats it different. And that I would agree with whoever said that data science is 1,000 different things. Like, I think my Facebook pops up and it's like, become a data scientist in 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh, nope, can't do that. So, yeah.
Back here, blue shirt.
How to prepare for a data science position? Like for interviewing for data science position.
That's a loaded question.
So
Questions we expect in the interview.
So I'll be honest here, and I will say that when I was younger, I completely lacked anything resembling interview or job preparation skills. And I'll tell you some of the things I did that you shouldn't do, if that helps. Always make sure that when you show up for an interview, you know what that organization does. I once walked into an interview and didn't know the name of the place I was interviewing at. Didn't get that job. Also, like we talked about before, asking them questions. Human beings are naturally selfish by nature. We want to talk about ourselves. So I promise, if you walk into an interview and spend 75% of the time asking them questions, they'll think that was the greatest interview they've ever had in their life. At least most people. So be prepared to ask questions, and don't take your preconceived notions in. Nothing's worse than somebody who's coming in for an interview and then telling you what your organization does, or telling you how you should be doing your job. Another thing I've done. So just be inquisitive and be open.
Really good point about humans being selfish. That indeed, if you ask right questions, ask about what was their career, they will definitely start talking. However, being an analyst, do some research. You can find some people that have the same job positions on LinkedIn, who have the tool, see their base or their competencies they list in the top 3 or top 4 category, and you will be able to see what skills they consider to be the best or the most important, and play around those skills. Pretty much learn a little bit of each and present them as yours. So, if you of course have them.
I would say specific to data science, not just interviewing for a job, but going for the data science job. If you have the time and the means and are capable of it, I would say go to a data science conference before you start your job search, and do it don't do it for the networking. Go to realize how much you don't know of your area. Go there and feel like an idiot because there's 1,000 people who are smarter than you. And then when they ask, like, what are you interested in? You can say, I'm interested in this, and there's so much more to learn. I learned about 1,000 different things. You come and you have a full docket of like new relative information that's like cutting edge, right at the top of the line of what people are doing and presenting and all those kind of things. And 2, you're hungry. And I think that's what you look for in an interview, is you look for somebody who's like, yeah, I can do what you want me to do, but I want to do so much more. Because the most dangerous thing is somebody walking in and being like, I've got this, I'm going to walk in and I'm going to add value right away, and I'm super successful and all those kind of things. What you want is somebody who's like, I know this much, but I want to know this much more. Let me in the gate and I will solve your problems. I will learn what you want to learn. So I'd say if you have the means, go to some of the big conferences like NIPS or PAPAS, any of the big data science conferences that are going. Or if you don't have the means, which is totally reasonable because those conferences can be very expensive, listen to some podcasts, read up on just what data science is doing. My experience is a little bit different because I come from the startup world. So I did mobile app development, I did telemedicine, I did a lot of things. And so I wasn't industry specific, I was skill set specific. I knew how to build a product and that I could sell, but right before I walk into an interview, what are the next 5 products that Forbes is talking about? And why didn't I build them? And how have I failed? And so when you walk in there, it's, yeah, I'm good and I can do this, but I'm not good enough. And I want to get good enough while we're solving problems together. And so I think go in hungry is the big part of it. But definitely be prepared for some technical questions. You should get a SQL question. You should get a Python question. You should be able to code on a whiteboard without having to Google it. Yeah, I think that's mainly my stuff. What about Microsoft?
Yeah, definitely code it on the whiteboard. Do that. And also, just like Igor said, with looking up to LinkedIn, I've done that for almost every interview I've had, and it really helps a lot. Understanding, what that person does, you get an idea of what they do day to day and what technologies they work with. So if you see something that you're not aware of, you can look it up, try to get some idea about it, because most likely they're going to bring it up in the interview itself. So it'll help you get an understanding of kind of what may happen on interview day.
Ooh, and I'll add one more because I wish somebody would have told literally everybody I interviewed in the last year. Drive by the office at like either 9 o'clock or 5 o'clock to figure out what they're wearing. If you show up in a suit and it's a polo and khaki office, you're going to be super overdressed and you're going to be uncomfortable because you walked in looking like the CEO. So just figure out what everybody else is wearing and dress relatively appropriate. And the good way to do it is see them when they're coming in or leaving work a couple days before, and then dress like you belong there. I see a lot of kids in like their dad's suits, and I think, man, I am underdressed for your interview. So.
To piggyback on her first point, actually, about conferences and whatnot, there are at least half a dozen user groups right here in Charlotte that talk about exactly what people do for a living, probably every month. So the Charlotte BI group does it. There's a data science meetup. There's a bots and AI meetup. There's the Davidson machine learning group, and there are a few others. Go to any one of those or all of those, and over the course of a few months or even a year, you'll pick up a whole lot of things that will absolutely help your career.
I will say, sorry, before you go, I will say one thing about networking, because I think you guys are told, like, network, go to a lot of things, do that all the time. From the standpoint of people who are hiring, networking events are a lot of people coming up to you and asking for all these kind of things, and that's great in the right area. The people I've hired, I found out they were data scientists when we were at a happy hour or when we were doing something else. So being out in the world doing what you naturally do is when you bring your full self to the table. So be able to know and speak at multiple levels about your skill set, because it's those really soft connections is how you seal the deal. I just brought somebody onto my team and our kids were playing in the same park. And I was like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm at the banks and I do this. And I was like, wait a second, I do that. And we started talking. And so I think it's not about always playing up those obvious network strings, but the very gentle and loose ones. So be sure that you kind of know your elevator pitch. So when somebody's like, what do? You give them enough to make them interested and fascinated by you. And that's like, there's a finesse to networking that I don't think we talk about enough.
Actually, that's an amazing point. To piggyback on that, I will tell you one thing that personally bugs me when people do it. If I'm talking to them and I say, hey, what do you do? They go into a 5-minute long speech about every job they've ever had in their life.
That's me. I do that. I would drive him nuts.
So, like she said, work on your elevator pitch. When somebody asks you, what do you do? And get that most of the people in this room are relatively young. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you do right now. Maybe you can rephrase that and say, well, you know what? I'm just getting out of school, but here's what I'd really like to do. And then talk about things you'd really like to do and maybe throw in 1 or 2 things you've done on your own. I've been working on GitHub. I've been working on Stack Overflow. I went to this hackathon. I'd really like to learn more about Julia. And so.
Yes, so my question was, I think a lot of us are looking for internships or full-time positions as a data scientist. So my situation, I'll give you an example. So I went into an interview. They asked all the questions and about models, statistical models, coding, everything. Everything went perfect. Then in a few days' time, they in the interview they say, okay, everything is good. You're a good candidate for this position. But then they come back to you. You didn't come in the top 10 or so, and then you didn't get the position. And they're hesitant to give you any feedback on that. So what would you say, how can we prepare after that, not having any feedback and not knowing what to improve on?
Yeah. You're quiet, Microsoft.
Well, at least for me, I've been in those situations where I felt like, I actually interviewed with Microsoft, I think 3 times. So, every time I feel like, oh yeah, I got this, right? But when you get those feedbacks and they hesitate on what went wrong, I guess, you got a sense of idea of the questions that were asked, right? So after each interview, I would write down every question that was asked and how did I answer it, right? And you can tell which ones you were unsure about, right? And so you can also go back then and look up, hey, did I answer this the best that I could, and study that. And then also, there's a lot of forums, especially for these bigger companies, on interviewing and questions that other candidates were asked, and you can get an idea of what may be asked when you go in for your interview. So after you complete your interview, you have some type of idea of where you may have went wrong at and where you may be weak at, and you can use that to study and build up in that area also.
I'll say I have a pretty good track record right now for interviews, so it's probably going to go downhill at some point. But I end every interview, so they ask you all your questions, and they ask if you have any questions, you fill them all in, and then before they go, they're like, well, is there anything else? I always use that as an opening to say, was there anything here that you heard today from me that makes me a risk, that makes you think maybe I'm not the right person? And can we talk about that? And we always talk about it. They're like, well, actually, you said your undergrad is in communication studies, you and every athlete and wedding planner for the last 12 years, that's your plan. And so they're like, so that's a risk for me. And I'm like, well, let me tell you why, let me pivot it for you. And I address it right there. I ask for that feedback as the last question. And I say, basically, what did you hear today that would make you a no? And what could I do to either change your mind or to be better prepared when I go out there? Because that's what they're looking for, is that transparency. Because ultimately, when you're there and you're in-house and you have the job and life is good, you're making money, the ability to own what you've done. So, hey, I missed a timeline, I put a bug in the code, like anything that you do, you have to be able to face that head on. And I think addressing that in the interview is a really good thing, of just saying, is there anything I said here today that made you think I wasn't a perfect fit? And if so, would you be okay telling me that? And then just address it. That's my advice.
And that's, to be honest, exactly what I did with my past couple of
You got
interviews.
the job, right?
Yeah, got the job. That's pretty much it will resolve the issue you have in not getting feedback from, I assume, HR, not getting the feedback to you. If you were able to address the same question right at the interview and be able to actually own it, like, as I say, as a man, be able to kind of take the feedback if it's negative or if it's positive, or turn it around if you still have a chance. So that's probably your best bet to your question.
It's also a numbers game. I mean, as you mentioned in your question, if an interviewer comes back to you and says, oh, you weren't in the top 10, there's obviously a lot of people applying for that job. So basic math, if 20 people apply for a job, then everybody needs to apply for 20 jobs for everybody to get a job. So definitely keep putting your name out there and keep bettering yourself all along the way, and then keep applying for different jobs, understanding that your first job will not be your dream job. It's a virtual guarantee. Your second job won't be your dream job, probably not even your third job. But all of those will teach you skills that will eventually lead you to somewhere where you will hopefully enjoy your job, knowing that it might not be where you originally envisioned you would go. I'm certainly not where I thought I would be 10 years ago, and I'm sure everybody else up here would attest something similar.
And keep in mind, like, you're out there interviewing and you're hustling and you're working really, really hard. Employers don't want to be interviewing, like, especially people who code. They would much rather be coding. They would much rather be doing stuff. And like, they're sitting in the like, they're interviewing with you, and they're interviewing with a lot of people. And so everybody wants to get past that interview process. You're not alone in your misery. We're all there, right there with you. It's hard to interview.
It's just as bad for them as it is for you, I promise.
Also, keep in contact with that recruiter, whoever you work with. You know, just every now and then, shoot them an email, say, hey, you know, is there anything open or something like that? Just so they can keep you in mind if something do come open again. They can say, hey, I already know someone that can fit this position.
We had a question back here, actually.
For data analytics, what are the primary technologies students must have?
Can you say that one more time?
For data analytics, what are the primary technologies the student must be good at?
I believe the list of primary technologies would depend on the company itself. As we mentioned, different companies prefer to use different tools. Let's say for the data visualization and presentation, some people prefer PowerPoint. I am a master Tableau user, so I prefer to use Tableau for all of those purposes. At the end of the day, it's about not necessarily about the skill or about the tool, but your ability, capability, how to use it. I've seen some PowerPoint presentations, and I was like, how do you do that? And with technically, I don't consider myself to be a good speaker. I'm more of a technical person, but at the end of the day, skills, different companies require different skills. But as mentioned a couple times before, Python, SQL, and at least basic, like Microsoft Office, not basic, advanced Microsoft Office techniques, Python, SQL would be your decent start.
If I had to say two things that you will absolutely positively must need to know is SQL and Excel. If you don't know those, you will very likely struggle at almost any job you get. And if you want the more advanced data science jobs, yeah, you need to add Python or R or Scala or something to that list as well. But SQL's the big one. I mean, you're going to use SQL no matter where you go.
Everybody knows how to use Excel, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, that one didn't even cross my mind as like, that was not a skill set people were born with anymore. we get Excel. I'd say at Duke, at least in our area, actually at the first startup I was at 12 years ago, and where I'm at today, it was still Python and Hadoop. Those were the big ones. SQL is a must. The bigger thing is being an expert at some technology. It can be C# for all I care. If you're great at something, you can learn something else. You've proven that. But I started with it. I'm still with it. Like Python and Hadoop are where everything kind of lands, for at least in my career.
For me, I see a lot of Spark, PySpark for analyzing data.
Yeah, that too.
And those are the, as we call them, big guys tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, even with a start, if you have the SQL as a start, a lot of coding languages are very kind of similar. They use the same logical approach to solving the problems. So if you have a SQL as a start, as Brad said, it's a really good point. If you have a SQL to begin with, you can learn your way through the rest of the languages.
Up front, on the front row, right here with the glasses.
Yeah. I actually have two questions. As a data scientist, how much of your, or data analyst, how much of your work or how much collaborations do you do with like research and development teams? And secondly, if I wanted to get some experience with some of these softwares that you mentioned, like SQL, Python, how can I get started as a first year student?
So begin on collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's a lot of collaboration, especially I'm mostly internal analyst. To me, I'm supporting internal businesses in different departments, and we have to collaborate a lot to be even able to help them to get there, because they are not your external clients. They will come back and tell you that you didn't do this right or you didn't do that part right. So collaboration is a big piece. So that's definitely one. Now talking about the tools, you mentioned Python. Python is actually open source, meaning you can download Anaconda Navigator on your desktop machine. There is a lot of courses. I even use YouTube sometimes to be able to start. So for those, yes. The same goes for the, say, if you want to go with a SQL, Amazon, since they are pushing AWS everywhere, they have a lot of free courses as well. Yeah. Just the tool. So with the AWS, you can pretty much, they have a lot of training courses. They have a lot of the software you can actually also download and go through their techniques. They even have the machine learning they're trying to get into there. That's to each its own.
edx.com. They have hundreds, thousands of hours of free videos and courses to say, just go to edX and type in SQL and then hit that filter for free. And you'll find a dozen SQL courses. Same for Python, for data science, R, Scala, PySpark, whatever you're trying to learn. So
Yeah, but don't just learn it, do something with it. So
Right.
after
Right.
you've figured out the language, go build whatever your own thing is, even if it's like, hey, I did a hello world here, and then put that on your resume,
Yeah.
because that's what we're looking for, is not just I have the skill, I know how to apply that skill. And I'll say for the collaboration part, I'm probably the worst example here. We collaborate with each other really, really well. We don't have a research and development group because we
Okay.
do have that startup feel. And so
Okay.
in the incubator, we say, figure out whatever problem you want to solve and then go solve it. And then we work with, I would say the collaboration is really big between our data scientists and our designers. And some of
Okay.
you might have heard me talking about this before.
Right.
TiVo has talked about this. Lots of organizations have talked about this. Because data science and analytics in general is a very complicated thing for a lot of people to handle, the ability to work very well with the designer, so you can say, here's a bunch of data and here's a Jupyter notebook and here's what it all means, and for that designer to turn it into something meaningful to your end
Yeah.
user is very important. So we connect data scientists and designers very closely, and then data engineers and data scientists work very closely. As far as them actually working with the end user, it goes back to, we want you to fall in love with the problem,
Right.
not the solution. And so they collaborate, but at the same time, we don't want, going back to the 1 foot versus the whole 9
Right.
yards, we don't want them to fall in love with 1 foot. We
Right.
want them to come up with whatever. So we probably don't collaborate like a lot of other organizations
Okay.
do.
I saw one glasses, black shirt on front.
Yeah, back to what you were saying about like learning the languages and then doing like your own projects. If you're like more specific on like honing in on a certain industry, do you prefer doing analytics and data science within that industry, or you think that's kind of limiting? As in, like, you can go in the finance sector or energy, or just like something different. Would you want to do your projects on specific like things like that?
I would say diversify it, because you probably can, some of the things that may be doing in finance, you might can use in energy.
Right.
You can find other algorithms that are being used in certain areas that can be applied to somewhere else.
I think 3 of our principal, which is the highest level of data science at Duke, I think 3 of our principal data scientists were PhD economics students. They weren't data scientists, they weren't planning on it. They were doing economics, and they were super interested in statistics. They went and they worked for the banks. And so the idea of being industry specific, while I think that, I don't have that experience, while I think that's valuable and super appealing, I think it goes back to, what if your industry died tomorrow? What if you were like, yeah, I'm super into Blockbuster, and then there's nothing? So I think you could go that way, but also keep your avenue open, because that area might not be hiring for the next 12 years, and then what are you going to do?
And just to add to the point, it's nice to have the experience and knowledge of the data you'll be working with. Let's say if you want to get into finance, being able to understand and know what finance data is, and when you see BIX, you at least know what it even stands for. But as was mentioned, being able to diversify, being in a role you will never work with one data set. You'll be working with multiple different data sources, from beginning the client experience, from the web, trying to understand their transactional history, or go even deeper and go, like, there's going to be a lot of different data sources, and being able to know more is better.
And then I should say, because my guess is you're healthcare, you're thinking the healthcare line, because it sounds like there's that here.
Only your finance.
So I know that, where are we? UNCC has like a healthcare area that's specific for data science, and healthcare is working towards that way. Not to like say like, hey, don't diversify your portfolio and don't focus just on healthcare. Keep in mind that if you were to go into one industry, utilities, healthcare, whatever those are, there's a number of avenues in there. So there's telemedicine versus like image analytics versus all of the different things that they're doing there. So if you do pick an industry, don't limit yourself to one type of analytics. Don't just go predictive, go descriptive, go whatever. Diversify yourself in some way. If it's not based off of industry, it's based off of your skill set, or it's based off of your interests. It's something there is meaty, is what you're looking for.
Right here, front row.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, how is the recruitment process of a data analyst role different from that of a software engineering role? Because there have been a couple of interviews that I've given in which the recruiters expected me to know all the data structures and algorithms in Python or say whatever programming languages, and the rounds were like that of a software engineering role. So currently I'm interviewing at Microsoft, and all my rounds were like that, and now I have an on-site next month. So again, it's like 5 technical rounds where there's whiteboard coding. So that, and the process is, I think, pretty much uniform for all the roles. So how different is a interview of a software engineering role and of a data analyst role? And what all should we be prepared with, basically? Because these are individually 2 vast domains to be prepared with.
I think back to the points we were talking about before, focusing less on the technology and more on your communication skills would serve you great in that. Honestly, somebody who has decent tech skills could get either one of those jobs with good interview skills. Somebody with bad interview skills could be great at either one of those and not get either of those jobs. So focusing, learn your basics. Like as we talked about, if you're going into data, SQL, absolutely. Python's another great one. We gave you all the words before, but then focusing on asking them questions, how you communicate and show that you're willing to learn, and that's going to up your odds about as high as they're ever going to go.
Those technical questions that they're asking you, you don't necessarily have to get them right. They're looking at how you're thinking about the problem. How would you go about solving the problem? Because you're going to come across problems in your day-to-day work that's going to be tough and challenging. So they're thinking about how would you approach that problem and how would you solve it. You know, a lot of things I say is when you're talking through a problem, talk about it out loud and to yourself, and make sure that you're understanding what the situation is. And so essentially, you know, those problems that they're asking you there is try to understand of how would you approach a problem and going about solving it.
If I might actually piggyback on that, one thing that I had an old boss that taught me, when you're asked a question, one of the easiest things you can do to get somebody else to give you the answer is basically ask them the question back. So you might ask me, I've encountered X problem with SQL. How did you solve that? And then you basically, as he said, walk through your thought process, and then eventually come back around to something along the lines of, here's how or something like, I haven't had the opportunity to solve that exact problem. Here's something similar. How would you solve this problem? So you give them kind of your thought process, even if you don't know the answer, and then ask them, and 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you the answer.
That's a bold move. You gotta be super brave to do that one.
I'll give you an example. For example, I was interviewing one of the companies, and the classic question they ask all the time is how many windows in Seattle? So try to answer that question without being nervous or anything. How can you guess how many windows in Seattle? So this is the type of interview question where you actually start questioning your interviewer, like how many buildings we're talking about. Please define the window. Is it size 3 feet by 3 feet, or are we talking about those windows? So they want to see you being able to take the stress, break down the problem into components, and take, okay, how many buildings are we going for? How many streets are we going for? How many windows? What's the height? Are we counting the first floor? So they're trying to go for those, try to go with them for those details. And this is like, no one expects you to know how many windows. I would never guess, even if, or who knows if all of them like actually.
Definitely two.
But never try to guess the answer. That's the worst approach. You try to question the interviewer. You're trying to just break them out, break them with the questions, and that's it.
Yeah, because no matter what area you go in, if you're working with an external customer or internal customer, they're never going to give you enough information for you to solve the problem, right? You're always going to have to clarify exactly what they're looking for. So asking those type of questions will help you build that mindset that, hey, I need to make sure I ask these probing questions instead of just a yes or no answer to get back from them, to get more detail on what exactly they're looking for. Because I hate to spend those 2-week sprints building the wrong thing. Right?
Yeah, and that makes me think, don't fall in love with the recruiter, fall in love with the job. The recruiters, at least from our side, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, they're interchangeable. We don't know if recruiter A or B brought you in. I remember you. And so when you guys are working with recruiters and people are getting you in the door, that's just a gateway. Keep in mind that, so, I mean, you're going to send the thank you card and you're going to do all that LinkedIn fun stuff. Don't do it to the recruiter, do it to the people you met, if that isn't obvious.
I saw a question, 3rd row over that way.
So, text analytics is a specialized area in machine learning or data science in general. And it has a suite of skills and modeling that we're depending on topic one. How much in the industry of finance, how all of the diverse industries that we were talking about, how much are they advanced and how much do they need people in that area? Because sometimes it's mostly like customer based. I want to know like how applications are applied in different companies here, Microsoft, Duke, and Banco.
It's important to understand there is a different companies and there is a different stages of analytical development. There is a companies that you can say analytically disabled, mainly doing just dashboarding on Excels, and there is a companies that so-called analytical competitors that are actually going to be the ones you might be more interested in. Those are going to be the companies using advanced modeling techniques and deep learning and different sort of AI to be able to advance and get the better experience, better profits, and kind of improve the company. So at the end of the day, you kind of would say in company I'm working for, we're pushing for higher use of the machine learning techniques, trying to create and improve the models. And as you said, really nice. I actually gonna borrow that one from you. Is like the model is the one that was kind of used, not the one. Yep,
Yeah.
that's a very big deal. So would really depend on the company and by case by case basis. There's a really interesting book. If you want, I can kind of let you know after the meeting because I don't remember the name right now.
You gotta Google it.
Yeah, I'll have to Google it. That I
That
listened
there
on my
is a
drive.
future for this? Like, do you think there is a future in text analytics? Like, is it going to be kicking in industries later on, or is it?
It's
already
there. We're using text analytics right now. We never went out looking for a data scientist who was like, oh, I'm super stoked about text analytics. But we had a data scientist on the team who was like, I bet I can do this, and like figured it out and applied it, and now we use it. And that's kind of where it came from. So going back to whether you're industry specific or wherever your diversity is, if you care passionately about text analytics, you care about something, that's your in. And that'll be applied. I know IBM Watson just came to Duke Energy and they're like, we're going to pitch you analytics and like, we're going to show you all the stuff we can do. And we looked at it and we're like, oh, that's super interesting. We're doing half of it. And it was like a lot of the same kind of area. So I think it's a healthy place to be to say like, I have an interest in text analytics, or I have an interest in image, or neural networks is where I'm going to be, and have a place where you feel passionately about. Everything else will kind of work around it. So know that really well, know that that's your path, but pad it with other competencies and capabilities. But I think it's around, and I think it's going to stick around for a while, so I think you're safe.
And I'm sorry, I probably missed the point you mentioned, text analytics. Realistically, we actually use the speech analytics, so-called. Every time the client calls us, everything is being recorded, transcribed, put on a stereo, and we are capable to tell who's talking when. The reason this is important because this is the only way we can realistically tell what was the point of the call. This is the way we can tell why the client, whether he has a good experience or a bad experience. If he had a bad, based on the survey afterwards, we can look into his conversations and trying to identify what was it. If we get in roughly 1.2, 1.3 million calls only retail side a month, so we're talking a couple million in years. Realistically, we'll never be able to listen to even a small percentage of those calls. Trying to create a sample, you can, but how successful can you be? So this is where these tools like a text analytics can be helpful if they're used with the proper infrastructure.
If your dream is like, I'm going to create chatbots, everybody comes in and wants to create chatbots. Every company is creating like 9 chatbots right now, so broaden your horizons more than a chatbot.
Right here in the gray sweatshirt.
So you said for interviews, like the process, communication is number one in importance, being able to talk well, with programming knowledge being second, as long as you know a certain amount you can get by. For a good amount was graduating, how important is it to have, either, is it a bachelor's degree fine, or, are you guys looking for MBAs, advanced degrees, master's degrees? And, if you're 21 years old graduating compared to a 25, 26-year-old with advanced degree, how can you compete at that level?
I think apply for appropriate positions. So Duke lines up data science in 4 buckets. It's associate data scientist, lead data scientist, and principal. If you're 21 and fresh out of college and you're going for a senior lead or principal, that's probably out of your reach, but associate I think is realistic. So actually read, like this is such great advice right here, you guys. Actually read the job description and see how many years of experience they're looking for and then apply appropriately. But I would really say it depends on the opening. We try to pad our teams with a diverse group, so we don't just want a product built by seniors, because then, if they ever move on or heaven forbid get hit by a bus, then we don't have anybody to support that. So we want to be developing those skills. So I think we're always looking for right out of college, no bad habits yet, eager, hungry, that kind of thing. The problem is we find them when we're looking for the other roles. So just apply appropriately, but I do think there's space for you.
Yep. I'm, for example, a bachelor in economics and global studies, and I've started in an entry role analyst, and if it's yours, you like it, and you're capable of growing in that area, you'll grow. It's a matter of time and skill.
Need to pause for a minute.
I need to leave.
Okay. It's okay. If you need to go, you can.
We can wrap up.
Okay. I was going to leave some time for networking, so I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure I
Sure.
respected your time. Were there any last questions? I think over here on the second row, gray shirt.
Yeah, so my question is, I don't know how many of you are actually working with the model that you build. So for example, you have a model, you predicted something, and you want to present it to your seniors. At what point do you decide this is a good time to present the model and predict something correct based on, some thresholds like adjusted R-squared, that's statistics and those. At what point do you decide, and how do you decide those thresholds?
So I'm in the product space, so my answer might be different than everybody's else. I'll give you my quick and dirty. The second you can do something I can't, you win. So even if it's rules-based, it does not have to be impressive. It has to be able to take raw data and do something magical with it. And you have to be able to tell me what you could do next. So going back to the best model is the implemented one, again, just get me a little bit there, and I will trust that you can take me the whole way. So early and often, because the second part to being able to prove that you can do your skill and all that kind of stuff is that you can actually deliver, and that you can deliver quickly. So we all talked about how much of a pain it is that everything moves slowly. So don't wait till you have the perfect model. Don't wait till it's all figured out. I mean, you could show me a terminal of code and show me where I started and where I ended. And if it gives me that much insight, you've already added value. I want to see it right away. I want to go think about what I have to do with the business to make money show up for you. So I would say don't ever hesitate. If you even think you have an idea, and if you can even start to attempt to prove it, it's the perfect time to share it. But that's my opinion from a very businessy perspective.
I agree with you. So, for example, not too long ago, I presented my boosted trees classifier with extreme gradient. It tells you. So developed the model, more or less tested. Realized that I don't have the infrastructure to implement the model on our AWS structure, because how much the model was tested was a couple of months of raw data, but the results were tested. They were much conclusive. The model works, so I'll go ahead and present that. Because by the time we create the infrastructure, get everything done, the environment is going to change. This is finance. The environment changes a lot. So realistically, you cannot wait till everything is perfect and present. Once you feel confident in your model, no one's gonna bust you or destroy you. You're confident that it's gonna work, go for it.
I'm going to close the questions now. I'd like, respect to your time, Brad, but I'm also going to introduce two individuals from our data science initiative who just wanted some quick remarks, and then we'll leave time for networking. So I'd like to introduce Josh Hertel and Doug Haig with our data science initiative at our campus. Thank you guys for being here.
First off, thank you for being here. This is fantastic and great resources. I'm Josh Hertel. I'm with the Data Science Initiative.
I'm Doug Haig. I'm also with the Data Science Initiative after 23 years in the industry.
Several of your faces I know you're already in our program. A number of you may have heard about it on campus. We have currently about 250 students between the Health Informatics and Analytics graduate programs and the Data Science and Business Analytics programs.
So the question is do you want to go to grad school or do you want to get a job? So that's a choice that you'll make as you're thinking about the world. Most of the undergraduate degrees are going to be in computer science, economics, whatever, engineering. Those types are going to end up in some kind of analytics analyst role, that type of thing. As you want to get more into the the modeling and have a little bit of formal education instead of going to edX. Like I was looking at my mail back there. I actually had edX emails in my inbox, so even I have to continue my education. And I continue to do that all the time. But as you're thinking about a master's program, we do have master's programs here. Compensation-wise, it's about $10,000 to $15,000 more a year as you come out on average. Now it's going to depend and all that type of stuff and what field you're in. But it will pay off fairly quickly. You'll learn some new skills, and hopefully what you'll do is you'll continually learn. So you're getting your degrees now. Maybe you're getting your second degree, but as you keep going, you have to continually learn, whether that's through formal education, whether that's through edX, whether it's through Microsoft courses, whether it's going to SQL Saturday, by the way. If you haven't heard of SQL Saturday, I got to throw that in as well, or the Power BI things. They're all very good things, and you have to be curious. So as you're thinking about your education, we have both a health-focused master's degree and a more general degree, which we call data science and business analytics. There are a lot of master's programs out there in analytics now. When we started, many of us started in this field, there was no such field as analytics. It has evolved. There are a lot of degrees. There's a lot of courses now that you can get online. I would just encourage you to continually learn. We'd love to have you in our program. You can apply. We take 3 classes a year, 2 classes a year that Josh works through. But there are resources here, online and elsewhere, that as you're thinking about data science, just continue doing that.
Doug is our industry liaison, so he works with a number of our partners across the region. I oversee the academic programs. How many of you are undergraduates? Okay, great. Graduate students? Okay, great. So for the undergraduates, we have an early entry program. If you're interested, if you want to get that fast track, one of the things about the starting as early entry is there's significant cost savings for you. You can count up to 12 credit hours towards the undergraduate degree and towards the master's degree and pay the undergraduate rate. So many ways you can kind of get a fast start in. For those of you who are currently in graduate programs, we also have a graduate certificate. The number of students will, if they're in a computer science program or they're in engineering, they'll pick up the certificate as kind of an add-on for more of the data science skills and techniques. Our programs are focused on applied learning. We work very closely with industry. They help guide, shape, develop, revise our curriculum constantly. We have plans in the works for a new undergraduate degree. For most of you, that's not going to be an option, but there's a data science conversation that's going on both at the undergraduate level and at the PhD level. That PhD one is probably 24 months away, 18 to 24 months away.
So the other thing that we talked about, there was a Red Ventures Hackathon last weekend. Did anybody go down to the Red Ventures Hackathon?
Great.
All right, we got some people there. There's going to be a couple of more coming up. There's going to be at ATD, which is American Tire Distributors. They will have one on April 6th. So if you want to do the things that they're talking about and get engaged and learn from the community, because there's going to be experienced people there, there will be students there, they'll be forming teams. There are great sessions for you. So watch.
Teradata's got one coming up.
Teradata's got one
Teradata,
coming up.
Tresata.
Got one coming up. Yep, that's right. So we are doing probably 3 or 4 a semester that we're actually somewhat involved or heavily involved in. And the companies that we work with, they're not there just to get the output. They're there to recruit. So there's more than one reason to go.
Let me make one last pitch, and not for UNC Charlotte. We have a great program, but it's not always perfect for everyone. You are in a great state and a great region. If you're interested in data science, the companies are here, the demand is here, but you also have a number of other great institutions across the state. And as consumers, you should be looking at those and looking at what they offer that's a little bit different, and then making that informed decision. So it's a great place to engage. If you're curious about data and what it can reveal, this is a great place to run. If you have more questions, we're happy to answer in terms of on campus. We've got these phenomenal resources coming from off campus. I'm happy to talk with you about our programs and some of the initiatives that are going on. Thank you again for being here, and thank you to the Christian. You guys did a great job tonight. This is a fantastic turnout. This is really, really a great turnout.
I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our DSI initiative. Coming out, this is an investment in yourselves with knowledge and understanding what maybe your next step should be. And a plug here for the University Career Center. Anytime you need help with possible interview skill development, resume development, or just kind of talking through your career development process, we are here to serve you on that end. So I wanted to leave some time for some networking.
Can I make one last announcement?
Yes.
Women in Data Science. We have a conference that will be coming up on March 26th for Women in Data Science. It is free to the entire campus community. It'll be at the Ritz-Carlton, which is kind of nice. So you can come to the, it's Women in Data Science Charlotte. You can track down, the registration will open up on March 1st. There's a second conference that's going on the next day, which is Analytics Frontiers. That one's a little bit more expensive. There will be a very limited number of discounted tickets for students. But if you're interested, you can go ahead and look at those as well, Analytics Frontiers and Women in Data Science.
26th and 27th of March.
Thank you guys for that plug. All right, network.